Anyway, let us go have a look at the Guilty Gear video. I don't know anything about Guilty Gear besides how it looks, really. But this video did seem fun. I'm generally surprised when I hear that overseas people enjoy Jollibee chicken because I've gotten so used to it, even though I love it. It's not as special to me as foreigners make it sound. I think especially with Americans, just because of, you know, the KFC stuff. I don't know. It could just be okay. I don't know. I can't really comment on it myself. All I can say is Australian KFC is good. So, yeah. Anyway. I studied how Guilty Gear makes 3D look perfectly 2D.
This is Guilty Gear Strive. It's
that actually does look really good.
the latest game in the Guilty Gear series, which has a very unique art style. The characters are 3D, but they look like 2D drawings. But how? For the last 2.5 years,
I'm assuming weird, fancy shaders that, like, control where the lines are being rendered.
I've been studying how to create 2D looking 3D anime, and Guilty Gear was a big part of that. Without it and all the information they have shared online, my animations would have looked way worse. Now, after collecting all the information available online, I want to share with you what techniques they use to create this style and how you can use them in your own projects so you can create studio level animations like this yourself, even without a good PC. And despite
You can definitely still... Okay, I wouldn't say it looked perfectly 2D. You can definitely still
Studio level
tell that it is 3D in some of the shots. I think faces are like... They've got faces down perfectly.
animations like this yourself, even without a good PC.
But I think especially with fingers, you can still very much tell. But it's like one of those things where you, in motion, it's basically, you're not going to see it, right? It's like, it's one of those things where if you freeze frame, you can absolutely tell this is a 3D model. But in motion, like,
projects so you can create studio level animations
You're not
like
seeing
this
this.
yourself, even without a good PC. And despite what most people
Unless
think,
you're an
the
animation
shaming
nerd.
is not
Or
why
just a
these
nerd.
characters look so 2D. So what is it that makes these 3D models look 2D? The name for this kind of 3D style is called NPR, which stands for non-photorealistic rendering or stylized rendering. The biggest problem with NPR styles is that each one has been created in their own unique way. So if you can't find info on how one has been created, you can only really make an educated guess. That's kind of what I've been doing for my Arcane and Naruto mobile videos, for example. Luckily for all of us, Guilty Gear's production is actually very well documented, so there's no speculation required. The techniques we'll cover in this video will be useful in probably 90% of your projects, whether or not you're a beginner to 3D anime and regardless of what
I made a donut.
version of Blender you're using. We will start with the basics and work our way up from there until you know everything you need to create your own 3D anime like Guilty Gear. Starting with this. A sphere with an outline, one light, and one dark color. This setup is what actually creates the 2D look for most 3D anime models. And as a quick note, I will cover everything in this video from the perspective of a Blender user, but you can recreate this setup in other programs as well.
Sure.
To turn this into this, Guilty Gear uses three things. The first two are the direction of the light in the scene and the direction the surface of the object is pointing in. If we know what direction the light is coming from, we can then see what surfaces of the 3D
I'm not sure about Guilty Gear, but I know that there are definitely a lot of characters that do the whole the Mickey Mouse thing. And this is kind of why some 3D Dragon Ball looks a little bit off. Because Dragon Ball is one of the things that does the Mickey Mouse thing. What I mean by that is you have the Mickey Mouse always has his ears facing like the camera. And this is why in a lot of 3D iterations it looks a little bit fucking weird. Goku's hair is another example. There's quite a few anime examples with this as well. It's like there's twofold reason why you do it. One, it's way fucking easier to do because then you don't have to worry about angles. Two, it's a way to give yourself a very iconic look, right? Like if you see Goku's hair, if you see Mickey Mouse's ears, like you immediately recognize the character regardless of the angle of the face. Who thinks? I need to disable this translate.
object are pointing at the light to determine which areas are light and which ones are dark. The easiest way to do that in Blender is with a diffuse shader node. Now we have added lighting to the sphere with a smooth transition from light to dark. But we need a sharp edge for it to look like traditional anime cell shading. So we need to find a way to make every surface under a certain brightness fully dark and every surface above a certain brightness fully light.
Right.
And that's where the third aspect of this setup comes in. We need a brightness threshold. Below the brightness threshold, the sphere is fully dark. Above it, the sphere is fully bright.
Right.
And in Blender, that would look like this. The diffuse node creates the shading, and the greater than node determines the brightness threshold, where the switch from dark to light happens. And to make these two nodes compatible, we need to use the shader to RGB node, converting the shader information into RGB colors, which the greater than node uses. And voila! The basic anime cell shader. Now, the last thing we need is a way to control the colors of the shading, which we can do by adding a mix RGB node to the end of the node setup like this. The basic setup is almost complete, but anime wouldn't be anime without line art. And to create it, Guilty Gear uses an ancient technique that is more than 25 years old.
Yeah, as you do.
Remember how we use the light direction and surface direction of an object to calculate the shading? Now imagine looking
I do love when developers pull out just ancient techniques. Like, you have so many games, and this is why I love like stylized stuff. You have so many of these modern games that are like, ooh, how do we perfectly simulate the way that light works and reflects off of these objects? And then you have these stylized games that are like, here's this animation technique from 50 years ago. I've gotten into so many fights with people over like ray tracing. People are like, "Oh, ray tracing it's not a bad technique. It's just a tool." Yeah, sure, it's just a tool. That if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and that's the way that a lot of people look at fucking like modern lighting, and it's fucking insufferable.
From the perspective of the light source, you would only ever see the lit surfaces. The dark parts of the objects would never be visible to you. You wouldn't even know that they exist. And if you can't see them anyway, you don't need to render them. This technique is called backface culling, and it's used in video games to make them run smoother. But instead of the lights,
Minecraft does need a lot of other things to make their game run smooth, though, and a lot of the re-implementations do it way better.
source, they use the position of the player camera to calculate which surfaces need to be rendered. And this basic optimization technique is what Guilty Gear uses to its advantage to create their outlines. In 3D, the surface direction of an object is described by normals. If you have a plane like this, you can describe the direction it's pointing in by drawing a line like this.
Right.
That's what you would call a normal. If you combine a bunch of these planes, you create a 3D model where every single one of these planes has its own normal. The 3D software generally calculates these normals automatically, but you can also edit them manually and invert them, for example. And what happens when you invert the normals of an object while also using backface culling? This. We can now see the inside of the model because the surfaces that point at the camera have been inverted. Now, if we combine both versions of the model and make the inverted one slightly bigger, we can always see the bigger one behind the smaller one. Then we just need to add back colors to both of them and the setup is complete. To create this kind of
That's such a hack. I fucking love that. Nah, that's beautiful. That is a beautiful hack of a technique. I love it.
lineup in Blender, we only need two things. First, a blank emission material with backface culling enabled and a solidify modifier applied to our model, which has flipped normals and the right material selected. And congrats! You have created the Guilty Gear look. If you want to learn even more deeply how exactly the setup works and how to set it up step by step,
and it just what the I obviously saw it on like the basic shape here. It just works on the monkey. What the fuck? What the fuck? Again, I love how much of a hack that is, and it just works.
check out my free 3D anime course with the link in the description. If you apply the setup now to different models, you might notice that it doesn't really look like traditional anime.
Sure.
While the math within the shaders are always correct is just not good enough.
And so while creating the basic look was rather simple, the next step is...
So if you wanted, like... If your goal was not exactly Guilty Gear, but you just wanted, like, a line art... Like, this would be totally passable for your, like, generic, like, anime indie game. If you just want to stop at this point, there's probably a million games that stop at this point.
Now to different models, you might notice that it doesn't really look like traditional anime.
Because while the math within the shaders are always correct is just not good enough.
And so while creating the basic look was rather simple, the next step is what actually defines the Guilty Gear style and makes it look so good.
Kill everything 3D. If you find something that looks 3D, you just have to find a way to avoid it.
We already have the basic setup.
Okay.
Now we just need to refine it. So let's explore what techniques Guilty Gear uses and how you can use them for your own projects. I remember when I started getting into 3D anime, I wanted to recreate this scene from Spirited Away. I created the basic cell shader, applied
That's
it,
fucking
and
cast.
it looked horrible. Then I tried changing the lighting to make Chihiro specifically look better.
The problem is... Anime is not lit in a way that even remotely resembles real life. You have like the shadows are convincing because they are consistent within the art style of the series, not because they make any sense with real world lighting. Trying to replicate it with an actual, like, just having a light source is never going to look right.
Which worked, but then Haku looked off. For each character, there was a different light direction that worked best, which is what the developers of Guilty Gear realized as well. Every character has different proportions. Some are small, some are big, some are massive. I mean, look at that hair. Which also means that every character has a different light direction that works best for them. And so instead of using a single light for all characters, each one has their own dedicated light that is optimized to make them look best in their default standing pose. But then they go even further. For the special moves where a custom cutscene is playing, they even adjust the light direction to make every pose of that animation look as good as possible. And we can do the same in Blender. Any version above 4.0 has a feature called light linking, which allows you to limit what objects are being affected by a specific light. This way you can have a dedicated light for each character in your scene. And if you want to go even further, you can separate your character into individual objects to light each one individually.
Yeah, exactly what I was saying. Yeah. That's sick.
Want to go even further? Goo Engine, a custom version of Blender made for 3D anime, has something called light groups.
Okay.
With these, you can not only use different lights for individual objects, but even for individual materials on the same object. This way, you have ultimate control over what the light direction for every part of your model should be. Just make sure to check that Goo Engine supports the current Blender version you're using before switching. It can be several versions behind the latest release. But this creates a new problem. The surfaces of the models aren't just lit or unlit, they can also block other areas from being lit. So how does Guilty Gear deal with drop shadows? The first thing they do is separate these shadows into two types. Shadows cast onto the same model and shadows cast on the ground. Self shadows can be very unpredictable depending on the character. Sometimes the shadows look good, and sometimes they can be very unpredictable depending on the character. Sometimes
Seen some fucking shit.
the shadows look good, and sometimes they look horrible. So Guilty Gear uses a genius technique to make them correct every time. They just disable them. This might solve one issue, but to make them correct.
Oh yeah, and you look at this, right?
Sometimes they look horrible.
This shows you exactly this would not be possible with a global lighting source at all.
Uses a
he moves and the light stays in the exact same location. Like, this is simply not at all possible with a global light source.
Correct every time. They just disable them. This might solve one issue, but it also creates another. Now areas that should never be lit all of a sudden have highlights. We'll get into how they avoid that in a second. Before, we still need to figure out the drop shadows on the ground. Since the light direction can vary between characters, Guilty Gear uses a separate light to cast the shadows of both characters onto the ground.
Okay, so you have individual light source for the characters to make sure they are lit correctly, and then rather than lighting the character, you generate the shadow based on a global light source, so the shadows are consistent in the world, but the characters are lit optimally for the characters. Make sense?
This creates a bit of a problem for us. In Blender, we can disable shadows for each light to remove the self shadows, but this also removes the drop shadows on the ground. Keeping it enabled brings back the drop shadows, but also the self shadows. During my projects, I've found a couple of ways to fix this. The easiest way? Just disable all the shadows. Who needs drop shadows anyway? The second best way is to duplicate the character model, make it fully transparent, and set its shadow mode.
Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. No! Stop it! Stop! Everything... 3D animation is not real. 3D animation is just a hack. So, again, we are doing fucking 90s game development bullshit. Oh, how do we have a mirror that works? Just add another player model. Just make the player model replicate the player's movement. Done. Easy. Oh, how do you do the scene where Sora... So remember in I don't remember which day it was. During the start of Kingdom Hearts 2, during the Roxas segment, in the Roxas data segment, the part where Roxas and Sora like blend together. How do we do this? Well, you have two versions of the room, and then you just swap back and forth between them. You just replicate the animations between both models and just swap back and forth.
To opaque. Now, if you change the original character model's shadow mode to none, the self shadows are gone and the drop shadow is still there. It's not a perfect solution, but it works, so yeah.
Fuck it.
But this still leaves us with the problem from earlier. If we can't use self shadows, how can we add shadows to the areas that should definitely have shadows?
Right.
The solution to this problem is actually very simple, but it still took me 2 years to figure out. The only thing that creates the shading on the model, so whether a surface is lit or unlit, is the shader itself. And the answer is already in here. If we adjust one part of this, we have solved our problem. First, smooth shading is generated. Then, a threshold value simplifies this lighting into one light and one shadow color.
Right.
And in the end, both colors can be adjusted to be any kind of color.
Okay.
I myself discovered the solution while creating my Demon Slayer animation. To save some time, I used the models from the Demon Slayer video games, and in the texture folder I found 3 textures. A texture for the line colors, a texture for the shadow colors, and this one. And for what would we use this texture? For the light threshold. If you change the threshold manually, more or less parts of the model are lit, because the brightness level on the surface needs to be more or less bright. But just changing this value adjusts it for the whole model. Using a texture, we can adjust the threshold for all parts of the model individually, which means we can set a default threshold value and then use the threshold texture to make some parts always be in shadow. For the Demon Slayer models, this turns the shading on the characters from this to this. Guilty Gear, on the other hand, actually doesn't use...
So you just paint... you just paint the shadows on. You light what you need to light, and anything you never want to be lit, just paint the shadows on. Just paint them on.
Textures. Instead, they use vertex colors. With
Okay.
vertex colors, you can give each vertex a unique color, and in that way, create something similar to a threshold texture. Vertex colors never get pixelated, but you're limited to the geometry of the model. With textures, you can more freely paint on the model, but you will have to deal with more files. Both have their pros and cons, but I think for most people, using textures will be easier. Now, we've already significantly improved the look of our character, but there are still a few things that we need to adjust. The line art looks good in some areas.
Using clothing model, Baker Light. Exactly. Just, again, using ancient game development techniques in a modern game.
But in others, it kind of breaks. Also, we haven't even looked at animations yet. 3D anime animations can range from pretty bad to really good, and Guilty Gear has figured out how to do it right. Lastly, the techniques we've already covered to refine the shading work pretty well, but it can be pushed even further. And this is where Guilty Gear uses their most powerful technique that can literally transform the way your characters look. First, let's fix this issue. We can change the line art thickness with this value right. First, let's fix this issue. We can change the line art thickness.
What the
Form the way your characters look. First, let's fix this issue. We can change the line art thickness with this value right here. This can solve some of the problems, but what if you want to make it thicker than that? Different parts of the model have different thicknesses that look best. So we need to be able to change the thickness on individual parts of the model.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we can't really use textures for this like for the threshold. But Guilty Gear didn't use textures. They used vertex colors. And just like the light threshold, they also used vertex colors for the line art. Unfortunately, the solidify modifier we have used for the line art can't use vertex colors, but instead we can use vertex groups. Vertex groups can save a value of 0 to 1 in each vertex of a model.
Okay.
If we now plug this group into the solidify modifier, we can set the maximum thickness and then use the vertex group to make it smaller where necessary. And that solves this issue. Now we have nice line art on the face, the hands, the torso, basically all around the model. But somehow it still looks a bit flat. Looking at these examples, there's something that the original characters have that is still missing for our model. And that's because the original setup was missing one important element. We have proper shading and proper outlines on the edges of the model. What we don't have yet are lines inside the model. And the inverted hole method we used so far to create the line art can't create those. So we need to use a second method. And just as a side note, in my 2.5 years of studying 3D anime, I've never seen anyone else use this second method of creating line art. To make it short, they are using textures. But that's not very special.
Sure.
The Demon Slayer games also use textures for their inner line art. But there's one big difference. The closer we zoom in on the Demon Slayer models, the more pixelated the lines become. For the Guilty Gear models though, this doesn't happen. And why that is can be seen if we look at the textures of both games. The Demon Slayer texture looks like normal drawn lines. The Guilty Gear lines on the other hand are all straight.
Okay.
But looking at the model, the lines are clearly not all straight. And the way they're doing this is kinda genius. If you draw a straight line vertically on a texture, it will be perfectly sharp, no matter how close you get. But once you rotate this line even slightly, the edges start to become blurry.
Sure.
This is what you call anti-aliasing. For most textures, this is a good thing because it smooths out sharp and jagged edges like this and creates a more clear look. But Guilty Gear wanted to keep all the lines as sharp as possible, so all lines had to be as straight as possible. And even though the lines are all straight on the textures, they can be curved on the model because of how they use UV maps. In short, a UV map tells the 3D program what part of a texture is supposed to be on what part of the 3D model. I've applied the same texture to this model, but you can't see the black bar anywhere because the UV map of the face is fully in the white area. But now let's say I want to add the line art to this area of the face. I can take these faces, align them with the black line, and once I move this edge over the black line, it also appears on the face without any pixelation. And that's how they add a line. It also appears on.
Okay. Okay, so you have hard straight line. That's fucking genius.
On the face without any pixelation. And that's how they added almost all of these lines on the model. This line here, for example, if you look at the UV map, you can see how it just slightly overlaps with the black line. And because the amount the UV map overlaps varies, the line thickness on the model also varies. The only downside to this technique is that you always need to have an edge exactly.
I'm surprised that works.
Where you want to have lines on the model. But if you're comfortable with UV maps, it can add some really high quality line art to your model. Our character looks pretty good now, which means there's only 2 more things we need to cover. The characters aren't just supposed to look good like this. They're supposed to move and do cool stuff like this. And for every 3D anime, there's this big hole that it has to overcome to be considered good. And that hole is the animation. It's actually not that hard to create a nice looking 3D anime model. Animating it is where it gets really hard. So let's cover the techniques that Guilty Gear uses to cross that hole and look as good as it does. In total, there are 3 main techniques. Usually, traditional 3D animations like Toy Story or The Incredibles are animated using interpolation. They create a pose on this frame and a pose on this frame, and the computer creates a transition from one frame to the next. Traditional anime, on the other hand, are animated using limited animation.
Yeah.
If the artist creates these 2 frames, there's no computer that can create the rest. The artist has
Well, there is, but it shouldn't. There definitely is, but it fucking shouldn't. Yeah, go. You don't want to deal with a lot of. There's some stuff out there that. There's some AI stuff out there that I don't fucking know why people use. I don't understand why people use.
draw all the in-between frames as well. So, to save time, they only draw a new picture for every 2nd, 3rd, or 4th frame. For my first couple 3D anime projects, I thought I could save some time.
Yeah, that is a core problem with a lot of the 3D anime. A lot of 3D anime do not... For some reason, they just forget they're making anime. It's like they work in 3... I think it's because a lot of the 3... It's gotten better now, but especially a lot of the early stuff, a lot of the 3D anime studios, they were 3D studios who were making anime. They were used to traditional 3D animation, maybe game animation, stuff like that. They didn't understand anime animation. But you've seen in the past couple of years... this slowdown, right? We are animating it at this frame rate. We are animating it in an anime style. And it's starting to look better. There's still a lot of bad stuff out there. But the stuff that looks good, it's getting pretty good.
By animating how I've done it before with interpolation and then just slapping a stepped interpolation modifier on it to make it look like anime. But what I quickly realized is that this didn't work at all, and sometimes even made the animations worse. You really have to handcraft each frame to make it look as good as possible. And Guilty Gear does the same.
You could imagine stop-motion animation, where dolls oppose each frame. That is exactly what we're doing.
But this technique alone isn't enough to create a convincing 2D anime look. I've analyzed a lot of bad-looking 3D anime to understand why they look so bad.
Yeah.
I even created some myself. And one thing even decent-looking shows fail is what I would call the camera test. Once you understand what this test is and realize how universal it is, you'll not be able to unsee it. In 2D, you draw the scene from a certain position and how the
other thing is the camera. I don't know if this is what we're getting into. When you're dealing with 2D animation, the camera is very important, and you don't really need to care about model realism, right? Like when you're trying to replicate that 2D style, I'm going to give you a good example. JoJo Part 2 opening broken model. Like when you're trying to replicate that 2D style with 3D, the models do not need to make any fucking sense because that's how anime works. This is the one I wanted to mention, where you have a completely broken arm. But that's totally fine because the camera is hiding it. Another good example is if you want to go watch the like the free cam stuff for any of the like 3D 2D fighters. Guilty Gear probably does it as well, but the one I saw was what's the Dragon Ball game? The 2D fighter with 3D models. What's it called? I'm blanking on the name. Fighter Z, yeah. If you look at any of the free cam stuff, it does a lot of bullshit if you look at it out of frame. Characters just spawn in out of nowhere. Models get completely busted up. Because when you have control of the camera, you can do bullshit. Here's another example. Another JoJo example. What happened to Jolene's arm? No, I wasn't thinking of sparking. No, not that one.
would see.
But yeah, sparking does it as well. Sparking also does it for their ultimates.
all the objects in the scene from that position. You don't know what all the objects would look like from
This was made by the Guilty Gear devs. That's part of why I brought that one up specifically.
a different angle. All you know is this one perspective and how the camera be able to unsee it. In 2D, you draw the scene from a certain position and how the camera would see all the objects in the scene from that position. You don't know what all the objects would look like from a different angle.
Yep.
All you know is this one perspective. In 3D, you place a camera in a certain position and this camera then creates a 2D image of what it sees. But you can also leave this camera view in 3D, and that's where the mistakes happen. Because what can happen is that you create a cool pose while moving around in the scene, but once you go back to the camera's perspective, it looks kind of weird. You have just failed the camera test. Since the final result is being captured by the camera, only the camera's perspective matters. And so your ultimate goal is to make the 3D model look how you would have drawn it on a piece of paper. You can break the model as much as you want, as long as it looks good from the camera's perspective.
Exactly.
Because that's all that matters. But even with these two techniques, the 3D program is...
Like, if you were to make this in, like, 3D, you would have his legs just, like... probably have his torso, like fucking 500 meters back, his legs giant. This is just not a perspective that works in 3D unless you're going to break the models.
Still ruining your animation in one very crucial way. And that is because the computer is just better in every possible way. But one thing that will always have our back is anime. Because anime doesn't want perfection. It wants to see all your flaws, all your imperfections. Since anime is drawn by humans, an important characteristic of that traditional anime look are the human errors that you can see everywhere. In the perspective, in character proportions, in lighting. 3D anime often look bad because they're missing this human touch. So to add that back in, Guilty Gear purposefully adds imperfections into the animations. Sometimes the mouth moves around on the face, sometimes the cheek changes shape. Generally, all parts of the body that are visible to the camera get changed in some way. Now, there's only one more technique that I haven't talked about yet, and it's their most powerful one. We've already refined the shading with a custom brightness threshold texture, but you can improve the shading even further. Remember what normals are? They determine in what direction a surface is pointing.
Sure.
But you can also adjust them, which we have done to create the first kind of liner, for example. But we can do more than just that. Look how the shadow on the face here changes. It doesn't do it smoothly, it snaps from one lighting angle to the next, all because of normal editing. When you create a 3D model, you define the 3D shape of it. The normals are calculated automatically to create the physically correct shading on the model. But with normal editing, you can separate what the 3D model silhouette looks like from its shading. You could shade this sphere, for example, like a cube, or make this face look like it's completely flat. Unfortunately for 3D anime, recreating the face silhouettes you commonly see in traditional anime doesn't create good-looking shading on its own. So editing it in some way is important.
You're gonna have to manually edit your normals,
by
right?
separating the face into multiple planes. This way, depending on the light direction, the planes of the face are either fully lit or fully dark. Always creating shading on the face that looks handcrafted. Well, because it is. But I want to warn you. Editing normals like this can get pretty complicated. I've tried it myself for my Spirited Away and Berserk animations, and in my experience, it's kinda unintuitive and tedious, which is why I haven't really done it since. But, if you're interested, feel free to try it yourself. And speaking of trying it yourself, now that you know what the main techniques are that Guilty Gear uses, let me give you some examples for how you can use them in your own project. All of the techniques we have talked about make one thing clear.
The X factor is the artist's intention. All the techniques we used are actually nothing new. Technically, the art style could have been done years ago. What made the difference was the notion that the artist's intention was the X factor.
What all the techniques we have covered here do is take the control away from the 3D software and back into the 3D artist's hand, into your hands. Because at the core, what makes anime look so good is not the technology used for it, but the time, skill, sweat and tears that artists put into it. The result you get from...
Like, I get it's difficult, but I do really fucking wish we actually saw more anime games that really tried to replicate that 2D style. There's a couple that get pretty close to it. The problem is they're all gacha slop.
Handcrafted work like this is not perfect, but exactly what's needed. If you're taking the human out of the equation, what you're getting is not anime. So if you're creating your own projects, don't just accept what Blender gives you. See how you can adjust it manually to make it look as good as possible. When posing your character, for example, look at it from the camera's perspective and ask yourself, would I have drawn it like this? If not, then adjust it. And if you don't know, see if you can find some references to compare it to. If your character's shading looks flat, maybe creating a custom threshold texture can add some more details like folds or wrinkles. Does the shading look weird on your character? Maybe completely disabling these shadows can fix it. Often no shadows are better than perfect shadows. If that isn't enough, maybe you can use line groups to customize the lighting for individual parts of the model. If your inverted whole line art looks a bit off, see if using a vertex group
Hello, welcome.
can help. And if your animation looks a bit flat, maybe breaking the model can create some more dynamic poses. When it comes to stylized rendering, what Blender calculates is just the starting point. Now you know how to take the end result into your
Wow. It's almost like letting the computer do everything's not a good idea. Fuck, that's crazy. This topic comes up from time to time, right? Like when we talk about, am I going to make a model? No, we're learning how Guilty Gear makes things look good. Join the VTuber cult. Like we talk about this with like UE5 stuff, with like nanite and ray tracing and all this stuff, but it always comes back to that, right? The computer can certainly automate it and make it quicker, but if you want to make it look unique and good, you pretty much just have to take control back from the computer and actually be an artist.
own hands and make it even better than Blender on its own ever could. But these are actually not all the techniques that Guilty Gear uses. There are a couple smaller ones I haven't covered in this video because that would just take too long. Which is why in my next video we will be analyzing the actual geometry of the Guilty Gear models to learn exactly how they've been created. We will also get a little bit more specific with some of the techniques we've covered here and how to solve some of the issues you might run into while using them. If the video is already out, you can click on it right here. If not, I hope you look forward to it. Thank you for watching. Maybe I'll see you next time. See ya.
Photorealism is great, but it's not the only route. If you look in different directions, there's a whole new horizon. You could be the pioneer that gets there first. The frontier is there, waiting to be discovered.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. That was a great video. That was a real fun video. I don't really do animation stuff. I think it's more important to view things like ray tracing as tools in a toolbox. You can't rely on only your tools to make things. You have to only one of your tools to make things. You have to use everything. Yeah, exactly right. If the only tool, I said this before, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. If everything is, I must have realistic lighting, I must have ray tracing, I must have all of this stuff, like, you can do it, absolutely, but you're sort of limiting yourself. I do say things like limitation breeds creativity, and that's right, but limitation breeds creativity when you're actually willing to be creative, right? When the limitation is you just not wanting to do the work, like, nothing can save you.